paper reports that two of the male prostitutes were given a late-night tour of the White House last year.
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers.
I want the truth.
You can't handle the truth.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Nick Bryant podcast. For those who have followed my podcast, you know that I address some very dark subjects. But I believe that this episode on the Extreme Abuse Survey is probably my darkest. I've previously done a podcast on the Extreme Abuse Survey, but after some consideration, I've decided that the subject matter would be best served as a PowerPoint. I should mention that this presentation may be triggering. The Extreme Abuse Survey. And here are the four investigators of the Extreme Abuse Survey. Two of them are American and two of them are German. Bettina Overkamp, a psychologist from Germany, and Thorsten Becker, a social worker from Germany, were the two German researchers. Psychologist Wanda Character and Carol Rutz were the American researchers. Carol Rutz, a mind control survivor, wrote a book called A Nation Betrayed: Secret Cold War Experiments Performed on Our Children and Other Innocent People. The methods of the Extreme Abuse Survey. The Extreme Abuse Survey for Adults was an international online survey that was conducted between January 1st and March 30th in 2007. The website came under repeated attacks. Several attempts were made to obtain the private data of some technicians and surveyors. The Extreme Abuse Survey, however, was successfully completed on March 31st, 2007. 2,337 people viewed the survey. 1,471 answered at least one question. There's a number of countries that are represented, but the majority of the people that filled out the survey are from the United States, and Germany and the United Kingdom are a distant second and third. English was the primary language of 852. 256 spoke German, and 21 spoke Dutch, and 10 spoke Norwegian. It's an interesting breakdown because females are overrepresented in the Extreme Abuse Survey compared to males. 81% of the respondents were females, 18% were male, and 1% was transgendered. The category of extreme abuse listed below that best describes my experience as a survivor is, the first row is ritual abuse. And of the 387 respondents, 191 or 19% said that they'd been subjected to ritual abuse, only ritual abuse. 69 or 7% said that they'd been subjected to only mind control. This is interesting. Ritual abuse and mind control together accounted for 513 respondents, or 52% of the respondents. And then other extreme abuse accounted for 22%. So ritual abuse is something that's very difficult to address because it has been the subject of ridicule and scorn. During the Satanic Panic, ritual abuse was embraced by the media and multitudes, but then the pendulum swung the other way, and the very existence of ritual abuse has been brought into question. But over the years, researchers have been collecting data about ritual abuse, and an article published in Psychology Today on September 23rd of 2023, written by psychologist Adrienne Fletcher, discusses her ritual abuse. So let's look at the reality of ritual abuse. A 2017 survey conducted by the British Psychological Society found that 15% of clinical practitioners had encountered ritual abuse. A 1995 study published in the Journal of Professional Psychology, Research and Practice looked at 497 Christian therapists and 100 members of the American Psychological Association and concluded that Christian therapists' diagnosis of ritual abuse was only slightly higher than members of the American Psychological Association. And a 1999 study published in the Journal of Sexual Child Abuse concluded that religious beliefs had no relationship to a therapist's identification of ritual abuse. So therapists' religious beliefs do not play a role in overdiagnosing ritual abuse. There was a 1991 study conducted at the National Center for the Treatment of Dissociative Disorders, and it was published in the Journal of Child Abuse and Neglect. And it surveyed 37 adults who had reported ritual abuse as children and were diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder. All the subjects said that they had been sexually abused, physically abused and or tortured, had witnessed animal mutilations, and been forced to take drugs. The respective percentages of the extreme abuse survey respondents reporting abuse in those categories were 95%, 96%, 86%, and 93%. 83% of the respondents from the National Center for the Treatment of Dissociative Identity Disorders said that they had witnessed at least one adult or child sacrifice. And this corresponds to the extreme abuse survey because 82% of the extreme abuse survey respondents had witnessed murder carried out by their abusers. People are rightfully skeptical of ritual abuse, but there are examples in contemporary society or near contemporary society of ritual sacrifice. Cult leader Adolfo de Jesus Canzano committed extensive drug smuggling, torture, and human sacrifice involving at least 24 victims on the border between the United States and Mexico in the 1980s. And Constanzo wasn't a product of South American or Caribbean voodoo. He was actually a Miami-born former altar boy. In 1980, Sister Margaret Ann Paul of the Toledo, Ohio diocese was found strangled and stabbed more than 30 times, including 9 wounds across her chest in the shape of an inverted cross, a satanic symbol. She was partially covered in an altar cloth, which had absorbed much of her blood. Blood was also smeared across her forehead as if her last rites had been administered. Father Gerald Robinson was convicted for this ritualistic murder. And 3 individuals came forward and said that they had been ritually abused by priests in the Toledo diocese. This is the age breakdown of the extreme abuse survey. A segment of people in the age group between 18 and 21, numbering 98, reported being subjected to U.S. government-sponsored mind control, which means they were subjected to mind control between 2004 and 2007. If just one of them is telling the truth, then the U.S. government-sponsored mind control didn't end in 1972, like the government has claimed. And here's the education breakdown of the respondents of the extreme abuse survey. The majority had some college, and 29% had a college degree. The vast majority of the documentation on the CIA's mind control experiments was destroyed by the CIA. But enough of it exists to demonstrate that many of the categories of the extreme abuse survey correspond to CIA mind control programs. The first category is aversive hypnosis. And of the 1,119 respondents, 37% or 419 said that they've been subjected to aversive hypnosis. MK Ultra Subproject 5 and Subproject 136 included aversive hypnosis, and MK Ultra Subproject 6 searched for natural hypnotics. A declassified CIA document dated January 7th, 1953 describes the creation of multiple personality disorder in 2 19-year-old girls by hypnosis. In a 1971 Science Digest article, Dr. G.H. Estabrooks, who performed mind control for the CIA, stated, by the 1920s, clinical hypnotists learned to split certain individuals into multiple personalities like Jekyll and Hyde. During World War II, I worked this technique with a Marine lieutenant I'll call Jones. I split his personality into Jones A and Jones B. Once a normal Marine, he became entirely different. The next category is being caged. There were 1,121 respondents, and 53% of them, or 595 or 599, said that they'd been caged. Being threatened with death if a survivor ever talked about abuse. There were 1,159 respondents, and 77%, or 894, said that they've been threatened with death. The next category is bestiality, and there were 1,122 respondents, and 52%, or 584, said that they'd been subjected to bestiality. Bondage is the next category. Of the 1,125 respondents, 67%, or 752, said that they'd been subjected to bondage. Brain implants were the next category, and there were 1,100 respondents, and 11%, or 117, said that they'd been subjected to brain implants. And we know that brain implantation was part of a CI mind control program. In Rhode Island, Jose Delgado, a Yale professor and an MK Ultra experimenter, implanted electrodes in 25 psychiatric patients. Those are the ones that we know about. And the next category is brain stimulation. Of the 1,124 respondents, 36%, or 403, said that they'd been subjected to brain stimulation. And we know that MK Ultra subproject 119 is substantially about, quote, recording, analyzing, and interpreting bioelectric signals from the human organism and activating human behavior by remote means. The next category is buried alive. Of the 1,118 respondents, 45%, or 508, said that they'd been buried alive. The next category is dislocation of limbs. Of the 1,104 respondents, 26%, or 283, said that they had their limbs dislocated. The next category is electronic harassment. Of the 1,127 respondents, 41%, or 460, said that they had, in fact, received electronic harassment. And electronic harassment is very similar to brain stimulation. So with the CI mind control experiments, it's entirely possible that brain stimulation and electronic harassment were done on the same subproject. The next is electroshock. And we know that the CI doctors practiced electroshock. And subproject 136 talks about electroshock, and Ewan Cameron, his research for subproject 168 included massive doses of electroshock. And those experiments were extremely sadistic. And he would actually wipe people's hard drives off, where they wouldn't even know their name, or even have anxiety about not knowing their name. And the reason why we have so much information about Ewan Cameron is there was a class action suit against Ewan Cameron and the CIA in Canada. Eugenics experiments. Of the 1,091 respondents, 9%, or 90, said that they'd been subjected to eugenics experiments. And the most significant era of eugenic sterilization was between 1907 and 1963, which puts us in the window of CI mind control operations. And we know that over 64,000 individuals were forcibly sterilized under eugenic legislation in the United States. The next category is experiments with dolphins, and that really seems out there. But of the 1,091 respondents, 3%, or 32, said that they had been part of experiments with dolphins. And the U.S. deployed dolphins to probe the seafloor for mines near a key Iraqi port. U.S. dolphin operations date back to at least the Cold War and a secret 1960s CIA project known as Project Oxygas, which envisioned dolphin saboteurs trained to attach explosive devices to enemy ships. The next category is experiments with human primates. Of the 1,090 respondents, 10% or 114 said that they'd been used as experiments with human primates. I cannot find any corroborating documentation with that with the CIA, but we do have 114 respondents. And if just one of them is telling the truth, then the CIA or some dark corner of the CIA has been experimenting with people and human primates. Forced abortion. Of the 1,096 respondents, 36 or 395 said that they'd had forced abortion. Forced cannibalism. Of the 1,109 respondents, 44% or 484 said that they'd been subjected to forced cannibalism. The next category is forced drugging. Of the 1,121 respondents, 71% or 791 said that they'd been subjected to forced drugging. And we know that Ewan Cameron's research definitely subjected his patients to massive forced drugging. But then there was psychiatrist Loretta Bender, and she was funded by a CIA front called the Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology. And she administered ECT, major tranquilizers like Thorazine, and hallucinogens like LSD and other psychoactive drugs to children as young as 3 years of age for protracted periods of time. The next category is forced impregnation. And of the 1,108 respondents, 38% or 416 said that they'd undergone forced impregnation. Forced participation in murder by perpetrators. Of the 1,095 respondents, 46% or 502 said that they were forced to participate in a murder with their perpetrators. So again, if just one person is telling the truth, that is a reality. Of those 502 people, if just one of them is telling the truth, then that is in fact a very, very ominous reality. The next category is forced to abuse other victims. And of the 1,113 respondents, 55% or 615 said that they had been forced to abuse other victims. And I know from writing about child trafficking that that's often the case when someone is plucked off the street. Younger people are forced to molest them. Okay, the next category is forced to murder or survivor made to think that she had murdered a baby. Of the 1,111 respondents, 50% or 560 said that they felt like they were forced to murder a baby. Forced to participate in animal mutilations and killings. Of the 1,110 respondents, 53% or 584 said that they'd been forced to participate in animal mutilations. The next category is incest. And of the 1,122 respondents, 70% or 780 said that they had been subjected to incest. Injection of painful eye drops. Of the 1,094 respondents, 19% or 207 said that they'd been subjected to the injection of painful eye drops. Marriage to Satan. Now that's a pretty bizarre category. Of the 1,100 extreme abuse survivors who responded to that category, 38% or 419 said that they've been subjected to a marriage to Satan. Microwave abuse. Of the 1,094 respondents, 10% or 112 said that they had been subjected to microwave abuse. Survivor's own child murdered by his or her perpetrators. Of the 1,088 respondents, 24% or 264 said that they'd been subjected to that fate. Again, this is so unbelievably heinous that it's hard to wrap one's mind around. But you have 264 respondents, and if just one of them is telling the truth, then that was the case with them. The next category in the extreme abuse survey is near drowning experience caused by perpetrators. Of the 1,109 respondents, 51% or 565 said that they had had near drowning experiences. Although CIA mind control documentation doesn't mention drowning, it's a time-honored military tradition. The technique of simulated drowning was reported by the New York Times in the early 1900s, and it was used by the U.S. Army in the Philippines following the Spanish-American War in 1898. It's also been deployed by the Japanese Army during World War II and by the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. Waterboarding became a go-to torture technique for the war on terror. So one has to wonder, has the CIA been honing and practicing waterboarding over the years? It's interesting that from 1931 to 1999, New York Times journalists called waterboarding torture, or implied that it was torture in 44 of 54 articles, or 81%. By contrast, from 2002 to 2008, waterboarding was called torture or implied to be torture in just 2 articles of 143, which is 1.4%. Notably, of these 2 articles, one was about waterboarding in Chile and made no mention of the United States. The next category is non-lethal weapons abuse. Of the 1,101 respondents, 50% or 554 said that they had experienced non-lethal weapons abuse. Pornography is the next category, adult pornography. Of the 1,193 respondents, 36% or 396 said that they've been subjected to adult pornography. Child pornography, of the 1,106 respondents, 52% or 578 said that they've been subjected to making child pornography. Prostitution is the next category, adult prostitution. Of the 1,068 respondents, 24% or 261 said that they'd been forced to be a prostitute as an adult. The next category is child prostitution. Of the 1,194 respondents, 46% or 500 said that they'd been forced to be a child prostitute. Psychic driving is the next category. Of the 1,093 respondents, 26% or 287 said that they had been subjected to psychic driving. Psychic driving was a term used by Ewan Cameron after he abandoned people, which meant wiping their hard drives clear of memories. He would put speakers next to their ears with loops of messages. Sometimes the messages would be accompanied by an electric shock. Radiation exposure is the next category. Of the 1,090 respondents, 9% or 99 said that they've been exposed to radiation. And radiation has been used, we definitely know that radiation has been used on citizens of the United States without their consent. In a long-running experiment at the University of Cincinnati that ended in 1971, 88 poor, uneducated, and mostly African-American patients with incurable cancers were exposed to heavy doses of full-body irradiation, a procedure that was largely abandoned as a therapy in the 1960s. Lawsuits allege that the subjects, some of whom died just hours after treatment, were not provided with medications against the side effects of nausea and vomiting because the researchers did not want the drugs to interfere with their data collection. Receiving physical abuse from perpetrators. Of the 1,129 respondents, 86% said that they had received physical abuse from their perpetrators. Sensory deprivation is the next category. Of the 1,099 respondents, 61% or 670 said that they had experienced sensory deprivation. And we know that Ewan Cameron's MK Ultra subproject 68 used sensory deprivation, but also MK Ultra subproject 43 was a combination of drugs, hypnosis, and sensory deprivation. Sexual abuse by perpetrators, 1,125 respondents, 79% or 890 said that they had been sexually abused by their perpetrators. Sleep deprivation is the next category. Of the 1,118 respondents, 69% or 771 said that they'd been subjected to sleep deprivation. And we know that Cameron's experiment certainly subjected those patients to, or subjects, or people that had the misfortune of falling into his clutches with sleep deprivation. But MK Ultra subproject 57 also studied the effects of sleep deprivation. The next category of the extreme abuse survey is spinning. Of the 1,094 respondents, 45% or 491 said that they'd been subjected to spinning. The next category is starvation. Of the 1,098 respondents, 48% or 532 said that they'd been subjected to starvation. Straitjacketed is the next category. Of the 1,087 respondents, 25% or 267 said that they'd been subjected to being straitjacketed. The next category is UFO abduction. Of the 1,074 respondents, 6% or 60 said that they had been abducted by UFOs. I met someone who claimed to be a mind control survivor, and I definitely know he had dissociative identity disorder because I have a number of his psychiatric records. He told me that he was given drugs and placed on an extraterrestrial spaceship. But as he's integrated, he's since realized that the spaceship was an attempt by his handlers to create an altar of a UFO abduction, which would negate his credibility. It's interesting that there is that crossover in some survivors of ritual abuse. They also claim to have been abducted by a UFO. Use of blood and abuse. Of the 1,164 respondents, 63% or 693 said that blood had been used in their abuse. Use of feces in abuse. Of the 1,106 respondents, 55% or 603 said that feces was used in their abuse. And it's interesting. I've previously talked about a cult called the Finders on the podcast. After two of its members were arraigned on multiple child abuse charges, the case was quashed by the CIA. Prior to the CIA quashing the case, the U.S. Customs Service and also the D.C. police raided the warehouse of the Finders, and they found a number of jars of feces and urine. The next category is witnessing murder by perpetrators. Of the 1,102 respondents, 54% or 590 said that they'd witnessed their perpetrators murdering someone. Witnessing animal mutilations and killings. Of the 1,105 respondents, 62% or 684 said that they'd witnessed animal mutilations. Witnessing physical abuse by perpetrators on other victims. 1,113 responded to that category, and 72% or 804 said that they had witnessed physical abuse by their perpetrators on other victims. The next category is I have experienced basic mind control programming in the control personality. There were 998 respondents, and 44% or 435 said that they had experienced basic mind control. The next category is I have experienced sexual mind control programming that was used by a handler for blackmail or personal use. Of the 1,001 respondents, 41% or 415 said that they'd been used by their controllers for either blackmail or for personal use. And MK Ultra Subproject 149 was essentially all about blackmail. Subproject 149 included safe houses where prostitutes would lure Johns. The Johns were then drugged and filmed having sex with the prostitutes using two-way mirrors. Many of the Johns were then blackmailed. The seriously depraved George White oversaw Subproject 149. He liked to watch the prostitutes and Johns so much that he had a portable toilet in the secret room behind the two-way mirrors where he drank martinis. In the Franklin scandal and also in Confessions of a DC Madam, I also discuss intelligence entities using honey traps with two-way mirrors and filming equipment. I have experienced mind control programming through which I was trained to become an assassin. Of the 994 respondents, 18% or 175 said that they had experienced mind control to become an assassin. The next category is I have experienced mind control programming designed to develop psychic abilities, such as psychic killing. Of the 989 respondents, 21% or 203 said that their psychic abilities had been developed. And Subproject 136 was all about honing the subject's psychic abilities. And the Stargate Project, or remote viewing, which is essentially a synonym for psychic abilities, ran from 1975 to 1995 and ended after evaluators concluded that remote viewers consistently failed to produce valuable intelligence. So the government is telling us that it funded a program for 20 years that didn't work. I believe that's very unlikely. I have experienced self-destruct programming installed in the event I begin to remember the programming. Of the 997 respondents, 57% or 565 said that they had self-destruct programming installed. I have been given an assassination assignment by a mind control programmer. Of the 988 respondents, 12% or 117 said that they've been given an assassination assignment. The next category is I was ritually abused in a religious sect, a group made up of dissenters from an established form of faith, such as a Christian sect. Of the 993 respondents, 39% or 390 said that they had been abused in such a sect. The next category is I was ritually abused in a fascist group, neo-Nazi, KKK, white supremacist, or other groups that consider themselves superior in race, creed, or origin. Of the 988 respondents, 22% or 215 said that they had been abused in such a white supremacist type group. Alternative healing methods have been more effective in helping me to heal than talk therapy. Of the 999 respondents, 31% or 308 felt that alternative healing methods had been more helpful than talk therapy. As a child, I told an authority figure that I was being abused in what I now know is ritual abuse and mind control. Of the 993 respondents, 28% or 278 said that they had told authority figures about their abuse as children. The next category is I remember being used in government-sponsored mind control experiments in Canada. Of the 987 respondents, 8% or 83 said that they've been used in government-sponsored mind control experiments in Canada. I remember being used in government-sponsored mind control experiments in a country other than the US or Canada. Of the 979 respondents, 14% or 137 said that they'd been used for mind control experiments outside of the US and Canada. The next category, at least one of my mind control programmers spoke German or with a heavy German accent. Of the 977 respondents, 28% or 274 said that one of their programmers spoke German or with a heavy German accent. And American historian Stephen Kinzer wrote Poisoner in Chief, Sidney Gottlieb and the CIA Search for Mind Control. Gottlieb was the head of the CIA's mind control programs. In his research, Kinzer wrote that the CIA hired vivisectionists and torturers who had worked in Japan and in Nazi concentration camps to explain their research in furtherance of its mind control programs. For example, Nazi doctors had conducted extensive experiments with mescaline at Dachau concentration camp, and the CIA was very interested in figuring out whether or not mescaline could be a key to mind control. At least one of my perpetrators went by an alias, but I now know who he or she really is. Of the 989 respondents, 31% or 303 said that they know the identity of at least one of their perpetrators. I work in a professional role other than as a therapist, counselor, clergy with other survivors of ritual abuse and mind control. Of the 978 respondents, 7% or 65 said that they'd work in a professional role with survivors of ritual abuse and mind control. The next category is I have visited places I thought I had never been before and matched the actual place to my drawings and or memories. Of the 982 respondents, 41% or 402 said that they had visited places they thought they had never been before, but they nonetheless had drawn pictures of the place or had recovered memories of the place. I have heard other survivors whom I had not previously met describe the same perpetrators of my own abuse. Of the 986 respondents, 34% or 337 said that they had met survivors whom they had shared a perpetrator with. I was subjected to government-sponsored mind control before I was born. Of the 975 respondents, 7% or 73 said that they were subjected to government-sponsored mind control experimentation before they were born, which I don't quite understand. The next category is I was subjected to government-sponsored mind control experimentation at birth through 2 years. Of the 975 respondents, 14% or 139 said that they'd been subjected to mind control experimentation before the age of 2. So that's part one of the extreme abuse survey. The subject matter of the survey is almost beyond or even beyond comprehension. Some people would posit that the weakness of the extreme abuse survey is that it was an online study. But thousands of studies published in highly respected science journals have been conducted online. Some of the categories of the extreme abuse survey may seem absurd or even fictitious, like the occult and ritual abuse subject matter. However, there are many respondents in those particular categories. And if just one of those respondents is telling the truth, then that respective category is in fact a reality. Because the CIA destroyed the vast majority of its mind control documentation, we will never know the true depths and viciousness of those programs. We would never know about the utter inhumanity of the mind control experiments conducted by Ewan Cameron, the former president of the American Psychiatric Association and the former president of the World Psychiatric Association, if a class action lawsuit hadn't been filed by Canadians who had been subjected to his psychic driving and sheer sadism. Categories like experiments with dolphins initially seem absurd, but we know that the military has conducted extensive testing with dolphins as it's attempted to weaponize them. 32 of the 1,091 extreme abuse survey respondents claimed to have been part of experiments with dolphins. Again, if just one of them is telling the truth, then mind control survivors have participated in experiments with dolphins.